sidle up to me in lifts and in restaurants, you know, fellow MEPs and MPs, and say, oh, well, Nigel, you know, we're very pleased that you've got the courage to stand up and say these things because we agree with you. Well, they might agree with us, but they're not saying it. So I'm going to go on fighting these people, and I believe that I'm going to go on winning the battle for public opinion, not just in Britain, but right across Europe too. And I hope act as a bit of a warning to you guys in the States as well, that this same phenomenon may well be starting to engulf you.
Oh, it absolutely is. 2 years ago, Judicial Watch, a public interest law firm, sued and got all this because they wouldn't release it through FOIA, but they finally did. And Bush in 2005 signed a treaty saying we're already part of an American Union with this private corporate board running things, but our national media will not talk about it. It's kind of like in 2007, the European Union celebrated 50 years. But I thought it wasn't founded till 2000. So you have this European Union by stealth through an economic agreement, and then now they admit it's a union, and the same thing's happening here. But you spoke about a huge awakening taking place. You spoke about the fact that if we just point out what illegitimate tyrants these people are, that they will fall. And you talk about people thanking you as if you can go out and do it alone. We have the moral high ground. We have the law on our side. We have history on our side. The problem is the bureaucracy has all the big banks and the big money that want to set up their own private global corporate government behind them. So speak specifically to the state of the world from your in-depth position as a key member of the European Union Parliament from England, and tie that into Copenhagen and the open announcements by Al Gore, Gordon Brown, Herman Van Rompuy, and all of them openly saying this is world government through this environmentalist tyranny.
Yeah, I mean, what they do, of course, and it's a well-established technique, they try and use any crisis. Now, whether it's a real crisis or whether it's a crisis of their invention, they use the crisis to extend the argument for a loss of democracy, a loss of freedom of the individual, and the increase in global governance. And I can think of two very good examples of this. The first, of course, is the so-called war on terror. That, you know, we face a threat from Al-Qaeda or whoever else it may be, and because of this, we have to give the state more power over our lives, and a lot of the judicial safeguards that we've enjoyed in Britain are now being thrown out of the window in the name of, you know, the war on terror.
And they're being used against non-terrorists.
And they're being used, well, of course, I mean, this is what happens, isn't it? You know, this is what happens is that once governments, once police forces, once they have these extra powers, they, of course, then use them in any way that they see fit. And I'm afraid that the result of this now 9-year nearly war on terror is that our loss of individual freedoms right across the Western world is simply enormous. It's as if the terrorists have won because our own politicians have used this as an excuse to get more power. Similarly, the same phenomenon is happening with global warming. And I mean, Al Gore, I mean, you know, God help us. I mean, here's a man who lost the presidential election, who has now gone on to make many millions himself. And this shouldn't be forgotten, you know. He's made many millions himself out of this scaremongering, frankly. Absolute scaremongering over whether CO2 emissions, as he says, are inexorably leading to temperatures going up. Now, of course, the fact that we know that temperatures have not gone up, they've actually now gone down since 1998 or 2002, depending where you set the bar, is irrelevant. But
so now they've changed it to weather changes, climate, any change is unnatural.
Well, that's right. And you know, they were hooked on global warming. They say global warming less now because it's cooling. But, you know, any time there's a hurricane, any time there's a flood, any time anything happens, we're told this is because of CO2 emissions. And we have the amazing situation with Copenhagen where, you know, we may or may not be signing up to some new ridiculous deal over the next few weeks. And, I mean, just give an example of how mad this is. We've just seen Britain's oldest steelworks up in a place called Middlesbrough in the northeast of England. That steelworks announced last week that it's closing down. In doing so, the parent company, an Indian firm called Tata, will be given £600 million worth of carbon credits, right, for closing down that plant. And then what will happen is all of that production will shift across to India, who of course have no intention of listening to any of this stuff. I mean, in the name of fighting against carbon emissions, we're actually literally exporting jobs from our country to countries like India, which clearly makes no sense at all. And we've got a situation where we're going to be signed up to treaties, which means that we can't change these agreements by how we vote at future elections. Now, the whole principle of democracy, whatever level it's at,
or sovereignty. Sovereignty. I mean, sovereignty is all about not being dominated by some foreign offshore corporation, British East India Company or empire. But a member of Parliament, a member of European Parliament, I want you to get into this key point here in just a moment. But I don't want to just run over the key fact you just laid out as we go to break here. You just pointed out not only are they paying them hundreds of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, to shut a steel mill down in the UK and jobs. But when they go to India, there'll be zero emissions controls. So even if you believe carbon dioxide is this murderous, toxic waste chemical weapon, even if you believe that fraud and polar bears can't swim and all the rest of it, and penguins are drowning, the most incredible aquatic birds there are, the ice caps are getting bigger. Even if you believe all that, this will produce more CO2 under the UN's plan, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, and the other big response in Europe to this is we are building tens of thousands of these ludicrous windmills, right across Europe, and we're told this is wonderful, this will be a wonderful source of renewable energy. Now, I'm not against the concept of renewable energy, but I'll tell you this. In Germany, they built 19,000 wind turbines, but not a single coal, oil, or gas-fired power station has closed down, because in the depth of winter, when a big anticyclone sits over northern Europe, not a single one of those 19,000 wind turbines moves round and produces any electricity. Even if cutting carbon emissions was vital to the environment, the way we're going about it is mad, bad, and wrong.
Well, it's absolutely. We're going to break. We'll come back and finish the point I interrupted you on. But it's not a windmill's fine on your house, because you don't have power loss down the lines. I have family that works in different power stations here in Texas. You lose tons of power down line. You have to have incredible power just to get it to places. The power's too low from windmills to let you transfer it and transport it, so you lose most of it. It's very wasteful. We'll be right back.
He's the T-Rex of political talk. Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network.
Nigel Farage is a member of the European Union Parliament, hailing from England, and he is now running for the Parliament as well in England. And we've got him for another 35 minutes with us. We really appreciate him joining us. He's a very busy man. Okay, sir, I interrupted you when you were getting onto the point about the fact that this is dictatorial. And then I wanted to ask you, are we beginning to get headway? Are we winning? And being around these European Union members for close to a decade, I mean, they're openly on television saying dictatorial world government. What do they say behind the scenes? Go ahead, Mr. Farage.
Right. Let's just consider what the concept democracy is. Now, there's an old saying, an old Westminster saying, and I'm going back now to the English Civil War in the 17th century, right? And the whole point about electing people to our House of Commons, to our Parliament in Westminster, was that no Parliament may bind its successor. All right? Now, that may be old-fashioned English, but what it actually means is there's nothing in a proper democratic Parliament, there is nothing that one government or one Parliament does that cannot be undone by any successive government or Parliament, right? That's why we have elections, for goodness sake. Now, the whole point about European Union, for example, is we currently face a mass of regulations that are going to do severe damage to the City of London, to our financial services sector, where I spent 20 years of my working life. And once those regulations have gone through, it won't matter a damn whether David Cameron becomes the Prime Minister